The wind carried the faint smell of rust and rain as Sarah Morgan stepped into the forgotten edge of Miltown, a place where the world had stopped paying attention. The streets were broken, littered with shattered glass, and the skeletons of half-demolished houses leaned like exhausted ghosts. She was 26, 13 weeks pregnant, and utterly alone. The father of her child had left weeks ago, after one look at the pregnancy test, and her landlord had changed the locks when rent went unpaid. Her life had fallen apart in silence, one unreturned call at a time. She stood now ankle-deep in a field of junk, staring at a collapsed garden shed, half hidden behind overgrown weeds. To most it was garbage. To her it looked like a beginning. Sarah's fingers trembled as she picked up a hammer she found in the dirt. The cold bit into her hands, but she swung anyway, straightening nails, stacking broken boards, piecing together walls from scraps. By nightfall, she'd made a lean-to out of a tarp and wood. As the rain began to fall again, she whispered to her stomach, "I'll keep you safe." It wasn't much, but in that desolate corner of Miltown, surrounded by decay, a heartbeat of hope began to echo back. Days became a blur of motion. Mornings spent at the library studying construction manuals, afternoons scavenging for materials in back alleys and dumpsters, nights spent hammering until her hands ached and bled. The people who saw her on the streets looked away quickly, ashamed to witness what poverty really looked like. Yet Sarah never begged. She built. Piece by piece, her shelter grew. 4 walls of misfit wood, a roof of corrugated plastic, a floor raised from stolen pallets to keep out the rain. Her only visitor was an elderly woman across the street, Mrs. Chen, who watched quietly from her porch. Sarah didn't know her name yet, only that she never looked away. One afternoon, as Sarah hammered the final nail into a wall, Mrs. Chen appeared with a small paper bag. "Eat," she said, handing over 2 hard-boiled eggs and a thermos of soup. It was the first kindness Sarah had received in months. That night, Sarah sat beneath her makeshift roof, listening to the wind batter the boards, her belly warm beneath her palms. She was still poor, still frightened, but for the first time since losing everything, she wasn't invisible. Her hands had built proof that she existed, proof that she could still fight. Autumn rolled into Miltown with the kind of storm that tears roofs from houses and courage from hearts. Sarah fought it with bare hands. Rain lashed at her little home, tearing free the tarp she'd secured over her head. She chased after it, soaked to the bone, shouting against thunder. Lightning split the sky as she dragged her materials back together, desperate to protect what little she'd built. When dawn broke, the shelter still stood on the barely. Her hands were cut, her muscles weak, but the walls hadn't fallen. As she surveyed the damage, Mrs. Chen appeared again, holding that same red umbrella. "You need stronger roof," she said simply. "Come, I show you." The old woman led her into her home, one of the last occupied houses on the street, and over cups of tea taught Sarah how to brace beams, seal seams, and reinforce walls against wind. In the days that followed, Sarah rebuilt with precision. That's when a man appeared at the edge of her lot. Neat clothes, clipboard, and a face that carried both authority and unease. "You know this is private property?" he asked. "Owned by Miltown Development." Sarah froze, ready to fight. But then he added softly, "You built this yourself." "It's good work." His name was Michael Barnes, a city building inspector. By law, he should have condemned it. Instead, he handed her an old construction manual and said, 60 days. Make it safe before someone less understanding shows up. It was the strangest mercy she'd ever been given. With Mrs. Chen's guidance and Michael's quiet help, Sarah's shelter began to evolve. She salvaged metal brackets from old bed frames, found insulation from discarded shipping crates, and scavenged weatherproofing from construction waste. When her hands blistered, she kept going. When her belly grew heavy, she worked slower, but never stopped. Each night she whispered to her unborn baby, "We're building something real." By December, she had power, a single solar light scavenged from a broken garden fixture, and a space heater powered by a car battery. It wasn't comfort, but it was survival. Then one morning at the library, she saw it. A headline announcing Miltown redevelopment plan, entire East District to be cleared by spring. Her shelter sat right in the middle of that zone. The company name hit her like ice, Donovan Development Corporation. Her ex's last name, her child's father's family. Within weeks, city vehicles began circling her lot. And then came the officials with their bright orange notices, eviction and demolition pending. She stood in her doorway as they taped the paper to her wall, one hand on her belly, and said, "You can take down the walls, but you won't erase what they mean." The battle turned public fast. A local journalist covered her story. Pregnant woman builds her own home as developers move in. Photos of Sarah working in the cold went viral. People donated tools, food, even insulation. Michael testified that her structure was safer than some rentals he'd condemned. Mrs. Chen called her daughter of strong spirit. But not everyone saw hope. The developers saw risk. At the city variance hearing, surrounded by cameras, Sarah stood to defend her right to stay. Mid-sentence, her vision blurred. Her blood pressure spiked. The last words she heard before everything went dark were Michael shouting her name. Hours later, in a hospital bed, Sarah woke to a tiny cry. Her daughter had arrived early. She named her Hope. Outside, supporters had gathered in the cold, linking arms around the small shelter that had once been called illegal. The developers tried to send in bulldozers, and the people of Miltown stood in their way. They held signs that read, "Homes over profit" and "Stand with Sarah." What had begun as one woman's survival had become a movement. 2 days after giving birth, the truth surfaced. A DNA test revealed what Sarah had already suspected. Mark Donovan, the man who'd abandoned her, was the son of Richard Donovan, the very CEO trying to destroy her home. Her daughter wasn't just any baby in Miltown. She was the granddaughter of the man bulldozing the neighborhood. Richard showed up himself, his suit pressed, his tone cold. "I can offer you a proper house, financial support if you walk away," he said. Sarah stared him down. "I'm not for sale." He warned her that pride wouldn't build a future. She smiled faintly. "Neither will greed." When the confrontation hit the news, the country erupted. Headlines blared, "Developer tries to evict his grandchild's mother." Donations poured in. Volunteers rebuilt her shelter stronger. An architecture non-profit offered pro bono blueprints. And amid it all, her ex, Mark, returned, not for redemption but for confession. He brought a flash drive full of company secrets, environmental violations, fraudulent permits, emails showing the company's intent to displace families. "Some things matter more than business," he said quietly, leaving the drive on her table before walking out into the night. The courtroom was packed. Cameras lined the walls. On one side sat Miltown Development's lawyers. On the other, Sarah Morgan, her baby in her arms. The judge's gavel came down hard. Demolition is suspended. Mediation is ordered. What followed was 3 days of negotiation that would reshape the city. With the evidence Mark provided, the developers' lies unraveled. Under immense public pressure, they agreed to a community benefits plan. 20% of all new units would be affordable housing, local workers would be hired, and green spaces preserved. And for Sarah, the woman they had tried to erase, they signed over the deed to her plot of land, officially recognizing her home as a model of sustainable community-based housing. Richard Donovan resigned in disgrace. Mark left the company entirely, dedicating himself to low-income housing projects. And as the dust settled, a new organization rose, the Miltown Housing Trust, founded by Sarah, dedicated to teaching others how to build safety from scraps. 6 months later, spring sunlight poured through the windows of Hope's house, once a pile of trash, now a home with a garden blooming out front. Sarah stood at the community center, her daughter on her hip, surrounded by neighbors whose lives her story had changed. The Miltown Housing Trust had already helped dozens of families. Mrs. Chen sat in her usual seat, that red umbrella resting beside her, smiling quietly as Sarah spoke. "We built this from nothing," she said to the crowd. "Not just walls, but faith in each other. Across town, where factories once stood silent, new construction had begun. Affordable housing designed with her blueprints, her name engraved on the foundation plaque. The story of a homeless pregnant woman who refused to disappear had become a lesson whispered across America about what resilience really looks like. As the evening sun painted the sky gold, Sarah lifted baby Hope and whispered, "We did it." Then, to the unseen audience beyond the screen, the listener who's still fighting their own storm, her voice became steady and warm. If this story moved you, share it, like it. Tell someone who needs to hear it that they can build something beautiful from nothing. Because sometimes hope isn't found, it's built.